Welcome to Diplomatic Faces. Well, a diplomat works at maintaining good relations between governments of different countries in a very tactful and mutually beneficial manner. However, in a world that is divided, competitive, and comprises of different sovereign states, cultures, values, laws, and goals, unique to each country, maintaining diplomacy is not easy. Nevertheless, there are those who are dedicated to this seemingly impossible task. What motivates them? How do they do it? And have their efforts met with any success? Well, in Diplomatic Faces today, we focus on Japanese ambassador to Sri Lanka, Your Excellency Mizukoshi Hideaki. Welcome. It is indeed an absolute honor to have you with us as our diplomatic face today.
Ayubowan, Wanakam, and Happy New Year. And thank you very much for inviting me for the first interview in 2022 of this program.
Before we go any further with any other questions, we'd like to gain some inspiration from you and ask you what motivated you to take up diplomatic service in the first place?
My desire to work in an international environment has roots in my childhood experience. I lived in the United Kingdom when I was from the age of 11 to 14, and I went to international school. There, I met students from countries all over the world, and I enjoyed it very much. So when I was studying in the university, I thought I'd like to have a profession by which I can have experiences in overseas and have exchanges with a lot of people around the world.
Well, after that and before you came to Sri Lanka,
yes.
Would you like to share some experiences that you've had personally before you took up diplomatic service here in Sri Lanka?
Well, I had experienced numerous positions both in Tokyo and overseas. And in overseas, I worked in embassies in Paris, Seoul, South Korea, and Washington, D.C. in the United States. And most memorable experience that I had overseas was probably in Seoul, in South Korea. South Korea is a neighboring country for Japan, but our relation has been often strained by issues relating to the history in which Japan had a colonial rule over South Korea. But when I was in Seoul, there was a dramatic change. There was a visit of the president of South Korea, and the president of the South Korea and the Japanese prime minister had agreed on a very important partnership. And thereafter, the exchange of cultures and exchange of people have increased dramatically, and Japan and Korea had jointly hosted a World Cup. So that was a great joy for me as a diplomat. After that, the diplomatic relationship between two countries are not always stable, but the people's exchange, which has started at the time, is still going on.
Well, that's excellent. So differences are there, obviously, but then working together can overcome differences. As a matter of fact, that takes my mind back 70 years ago. And just to recap, what happened 70 years ago? Well, it was in September 1951 at the San Francisco Peace Conference that Sri Lanka's representative, the then finance minister, Junius Richard Jayawardena, isn't it, made a historic speech in which he urged the world community to be magnanimous towards Japan. He quoted the Dhammapada, which said, "Hatred ceases not by hatred, but by love."
Yes.
And that speech actually resulted in Japan being admitted to the international community after World War II and set the tone for the peace conference. In fact, it is this particular speech by former Sri Lankan President Jayawardena that is still remembered by the Japanese people with profound gratitude and reverence. So we could actually say that it was that speech that set the foundation for the bilateral relationship between Japan and Sri Lanka.
Yes.
So having said that, Your Excellency, what do you personally feel about the present status in the relationship between the two countries?
As you have just said, the speech by the late President J.R. Jayawardena is still very much remembered by Japanese people. Japanese people have a lot of respect to him, and we are very thankful to him. In fact, before coming to Sri Lanka, I visited a temple in Kamakura where his stone memorial is there, and in there the word just you have quoted, hatred ceases not by hatred, by love, is inscribed. So by visiting there, I once again remembered his words, and coming to Sri Lanka, I would like to respond to his love and generosity to Sri Lankan people. And in fact, having come to Sri Lanka, I have met a lot of Sri Lankan people who have been working for a good relationship of Japan and Sri Lanka. And they are all, well, appreciating, for example, Japan's assistance, economic assistance to Sri Lanka. And fortunately, I had the occasion to attend a ceremony for the opening of Keani Bridge, for which Japan has assisted. And I heard from a lot of people the words of appreciation. So basically, the bond that the late President J.R. Jayawardena has laid is still there in between our two countries.
Well, that's excellent. That's excellent, and I'm sure it took a lot of hard work to maintain that bond and that strong relationship. And we also know that Japan is home to many Sri Lankan students, which is the next generation of those who will be leading the country. And we also know that Japanese people are very kind and generous, and they have a very nice, humble demeanor. And that has resulted in our students feeling very, very secure in Japan. So much so that they select Japan over many other countries. But to those who cannot or who are unable to have the financial means to travel to Japan and live in Japan and, you know, gain that education, how can they avail themselves of the education that Japan offers while they are still here in Sri Lanka? Are there any initiatives in Sri Lanka that could assist them?
Well, first of all, there are opportunities for those who does not have the means to travel to Japan. Some scholarships, but also, as you say, there are some means also to learn about Japan without going there. More and more universities in Sri Lanka have Japanese programs in their courses, and Japanese government is encouraging it and supporting those programs. And also JICA is starting this year a program called Japan Chair, in which they give an educational program in which you can learn about the history of development of Japan. And I hope those programs will be useful to Sri Lankan students who are interested in Japan.
Well, that's great. For those who have completed their education and who want to venture into some career or the other, are there any job opportunities that they could avail themselves of in Japan?
Well, actually, we are starting this year, from January 2022, a new status of residence in Japan. It's called Specified Skilled Worker Program, and it will be introduced for people of Sri Lanka. And also, to get this status, the exams will be regularly conducted from the end of this month for those who have certain skill of Japanese language and knowledge of either food service or care worker industry. So sending the talented Sri Lankan workforce to Japan will contribute to the lack of workforce in Japan and to promote the acquisition of foreign currency and job opportunities for youth in Sri Lanka. I hope that this system will lead to solve various issues that both countries are facing.
I'm sure it would. What do you have to say about the infrastructure projects, Your Excellency, which are already in place in Sri Lanka? Would you like to highlight some of those infrastructure projects? We heard that there is a newly opened bridge construction project currently underway over the Kalani River as well. So are there any more like that?
Well, now the one currently going on, the Bandaranaike International Airport terminal project. So this Japan is assisting a project to build a new terminal in the Bandaranaike International Airport, and I hope that will help the promotion of tourism in Sri Lanka. And another thing that we are now currently doing is the digitalization of terrestrial television broadcasting. You may not call it exactly an infrastructure project, but well, it's in a way infrastructure for the TV networks. So those are the ones. who are ongoing. And so we would like to continue with those projects that are ongoing.
Well, that's actually very, very appreciated, because when we do open up for tourism,
Yes.
then we'll be ready for that,
Yes.
isn't it? Because
Yes.
everything's been shut down.
Yes.
And speaking of being shut down and COVID and the pandemic, well,
Yes.
we know it took a great toll not only on Sri Lanka, but even in other, it affected the whole world. But what we have to say is that it was the Japanese government that really helped Sri Lanka during those trying times, particularly with regard to the third phase,
Yes.
the third wave of the outbreak, by providing the AstraZeneca
Yes.
vaccine to actually successfully mitigate the COVID crisis here. Now, having said that,
Yes.
what is the current COVID situation in your country of Japan?
Japan has also succeeded in controlling the pandemic through a rapid vaccination program. After the peak in late August, after the Olympic Games, the number of new patients has rapidly decreased with the progress of vaccination and is now around 100 to 200 people a day. And the full vaccination rate in Japan is now around 78%. So the situation in Japan is quite stable.
That's good news. Well, on that positive note, what do you foresee for next year or post-COVID Japan?
Well, actually, we still have to be vigilant because there are some Omicron variant cases in Japan. As of December 22nd, there are 160 infections found in Osaka and Kyoto. So it's really hard to say. Perhaps it's too early to say optimistic thing. But, well, I hope over time it will cease and the travel restrictions be lifted and exchange between Japan and Sri Lanka will recover.
Well, we are grateful for your honesty and candid response with regard to that. It's appreciated that we cannot really foresee exactly what is in store for the future. Your Excellency, well, you know, Sri Lanka is a country of central importance in the Indo-Pacific region. So what is Japan's stance with regard to this, and how does Japan view the free and open Indo-Pacific region?
Well, the Indian Ocean Pacific region has been always the source of vitality for the progress and development of the greater regions. So we put a great focus on this region. And Sri Lanka, located at the pivot of the east-west sea lanes, has been playing a central role in such dynamism since old days. And today, it's our important partner in realizing a free and open Indo-Pacific. And Japan and Sri Lanka are natural maritime partners that share the geographical attribute of being continental islands, whose prosperity and welfare rest upon the blessing of the sea. A free and open Indo-Pacific is an endeavor to foster Indo-Pacific to be a global commons or international public goods through promoting freedom of navigation and a rule-based order. And as is clear from its name, it is a vision free and open to all countries. that share its basic principles. And Japan and Sri Lanka have been making steady progress in maritime partnership, including the extension of our assistance to the Sri Lanka Coast Guard. Actually, since I came to Sri Lanka, the only time I went outside Colombo was visiting Melissa.
Yes.
That is where the headquarters of Coast Guard is. And I attended a handover ceremony of a Japanese kind of speed rubber boats. And well, actually, I did a trial ride, and I went out to the Indian Sea, and I experienced the value of this Indian Ocean, free and open, beauty and free and open Indian Ocean.
Well, that was the first, but it need not be the last. And maybe that would motivate you to make more visits around the coastal belt of Sri Lanka to enjoy, because Sri Lanka is indeed a paradise.
Yes,
so,
the coastline was very beautiful.
Yes. So we hope you would avail yourselves of more features that Sri Lanka has to offer. Now, moving on to some figures and statistics, well, we know that there are currently about 75 Japanese investment projects that are currently operating in Sri Lanka. And in fact, Japan has invested about $382 million, am I right, over the past 15 years, creating more than 12,000 jobs. So in your view, what more do you think could be done to promote investment in Sri Lanka?
Well, I think Sri Lanka has great potential to attract foreign investment. But to promote it, Japan is, well, since 2009, doing a Japan-Sri Lanka government-private joint forum. And this is done by Japan Chamber of Commerce and Industry in Sri Lanka and Board of Investment of Sri Lanka and the Japanese Embassy. So, but to promote more the foreign investment to Sri Lanka, we need to promote the attractiveness of Sri Lankan situation, the high level of the skills of the Sri Lankan people's, Sri Lanka's labor force, and also recognition of Sri Lanka being near the big markets like India and even Middle East. And also, I think it's important for Sri Lanka government to listen to the need of Japanese investors. I think for foreign investment, matching between the need and investors, this is very important. So I think there is a
to adapt?
Yes, so it's a two-way effort. Sri Lanka government should also make improvements to attract Japanese investors.
And speaking of Japan's involvement in our country, we do have our national television station, the Sri Lanka Rupavahini Corporation, which is in fact a project that was initiated by Japan. And recently, you did pay a courtesy call and held discussions with our Honorable Minister of Media,
Yes.
Dallas Alha Peruma.
Yes.
Well, Your Excellency, could you share a couple of highlights or a little bit about what your interaction was all about,
Yes.
and what joint ventures you have in store based on those discussions?
Yes. Well, I visited the Minister for the Mass Media, Honorable Dallas Alha Peruma, and we had a quite constructive and lively discussions. Our discussions was mainly focused on the promoting the digitalization of terrestrial television broadcasting, DTTB. Government of Japan is supporting the DTTB project through the Japanese ODA loan, and this support contributes to the development of a DTTB platform and terrestrial digital broadcast, such as transmitting stations and terrestrial digital broadcasting studios. In the conversation with the minister, he updated the progress of the project and expressed a willingness that terrestrial digital broadcasting in Sri Lanka will be started by no later than 2025. Japan is also expecting early realization of the DTTB in Sri Lanka. We make a commitment of continuous support for the project. And in this connection, Japan decided to extend the disbursement period of the loan until 2028 in view of the current financial situation of Sri Lanka.
Thank you very much indeed for digitizing the Sri Lanka Rupavahini Corporation and preparing us really to meet the future. And in speaking of the future, what do you think are some of the biggest challenges we face as a country, and what strategic advice would you like to personally share in order to combat these challenges?
Well, you have the obviously now the economic challenges, but apart from the economic challenges, you have the your challenge would be healing the wounds of 3 decades of conflict, and also recent Easter Sunday attack. And Japan has been supporting Sri Lanka's peace building, reconstruction, and development of the conflict-affected area for many years. Currently, we are extending our supports to humanitarian demining activities and human resource development in the judicial system, and so on. And we understand that healing the wounds is not an easy task, and there are issues which clear-cut answer may not be easily found. However, we believe it is important that Sri Lanka continue to exert its further efforts, and the international communities strive to work with Sri Lanka in this effort. And Japan will continue to do its part in combining its efforts with the people and the government of Sri Lanka and with the international community.
And we indeed appreciate the support that Japan has been offering, because yes, turbulent times, challenges are great, but support and help and optimism is the way forward. And is there any particular event or individual or any occurrence that actually greatly influenced Japan as a country, as a nation, with regard to its policies, and if so, how?
Well, one thing that I can point out is any Japanese will think that the one thing that impacted Japan most in the post-World War is the Great East Japan earthquake in 2013, and which deprived the lives of about 18,000 people. And that has greatly influenced the policies of Japan in many fields. First of all, of course, the disaster prevention measures. Although Japan has been very advanced in natural disaster prevention, it has made more efforts on that. And also, because there was an accident of nuclear power plant because of tsunami, that greatly impacted our policy for our nuclear power generation. And it has also influenced Japan's attitudes towards other countries, because Japan has received a lot of support from international community, including Sri Lanka's. Sri Lanka's ambassador to Japan at the time went to the site directly himself and distributed food, including Sri Lankan curry. That was a very famous story in Japan. And I have met the ambassador recently and told my feeling of thanks to him. So it had impacts on many aspects. So, and I think it still has a lot of impact on the Japanese people.
Well, I think being a country that has experienced disaster and having come out of it, it's understandable now how you feel empathy towards countries like Sri Lanka, who, countries that go through disaster and who are just trying to lift its head. So we are indeed grateful for your empathy and appreciation as well for the services. They may be little, but whatever services that we can offer to encourage Japan and support Japan. Your Excellency, on a personal level, what advice would you like to share with individuals, Sri Lankans, who aspire to join foreign service?
Well, foreign service, diplomat is a great profession. There are lots of things that you can experience by being a diplomat. And those who want to prepare to be a diplomat, I would recommend two things. First, to have interest in everything happening in the world. Even a very small country, even a country which seems to be remote from Sri Lanka, to have a curiosity to foreign country. I think it's important. Secondly, on the other hand, it's also important to know about your country, to study the culture, history, or industry, because once you are a diplomat overseas, you are a salesman of your country. So those two things I would recommend the young people of Sri Lanka who aspires to be in foreign service.
And I'm sure those invaluable words of advice would be taken to heart by the younger generation, coming from a person who has a wealth of experience behind him. Well, Your Excellency, Mizukoshi Hideaki, Japanese Ambassador to Sri Lanka, I would like to attempt to say this in Japanese. Arigatou gozaimashita. Thank you very, very much indeed. Thank you for being our diplomatic face today. And it has been a pleasure, a privilege, a delight to have you with us, sir. Thank you. Thank you for joining us on Rupavahini. Until we meet again with another diplomatic face, stay peaceable and happy with everyone.